In 2018, the Pentagon held a war game depicting a scenario in which the United States military would be deployed against the American people. The Intercept has published documents detailing the background information on the exercise. The Pentagon imagined a disenfranchised Generation Z, strapped with college debt and no opportunities. They have lost faith in the American dream and believe the system is rigged against them, and so they rise up. To be clear, the scenario is fictitious and should not be interpreted as being based on real intelligence. However, the Pentagon does try to make war game scenarios realistic, and it certainly identifies real reasons that people are pissed off at the establishment. The system, from the Federal Reserve to the police state, has kept people under the thumb of the government and their corporate cronies. The US military clearly thinks this is along the lines of the threats that they will face over the next decade. The exercise material details the scenario. In early 2025, a cadre of disaffected Zoomers launch a protest movement, beginning in parks, rallies, protests, and coffee shops, first in Seattle, then in New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Austin. A group known as Zbellion begins a global cyber campaign to expose injustice and corruption and to support causes it deems beneficial. During face-to-face recruitment, would-be members of Zbellion are given instructions for going to sites on the dark web that allow them to access sophisticated malware to siphon funds from corporations, financial institutions, and non-profits that support the establishment. The gains are then converted to Bitcoin and distributed to worthy recipients, including fellow Zbellion members who claim financial need. Gen Z's most militant members have essentially taken to privately taxing large corporations and other institutions to combat income equality, or, as the wargamers put it, using the cyber world to spread a call for anarchy. Now here we are in 2020. And sadly, the military being used against the American people has not only become a distinct possibility, it's showed up on a lot of our screens. And it is interesting that the war game starts in Seattle. Welcome to Chaz, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Earlier this year, a section of Seattle declared itself a free autonomous zone. Protesters, who claimed to have the support of the businesses within the area, set up roadblocks and occupied an abandoned police precinct. Police and National Guard units pulled out of the area. Police barricades and walls were used by protesters to create a defensive traffic flow throughout the area. Armed citizens guarded the entrances to the area. A friendly neighborhood drug lord even provided some of the security and weapons. The police department sign was altered to read People Department. Socialist City Council member Kshama Sawant jockeyed for control over the movement. She was one of the many speakers to address the crowds in the autonomous zone, saying, "What we are seeing now is an uprising, a rebellion of young people, not just nationwide, but globally." A few weeks earlier, Kshama Sawant tweeted that corporations like Amazon need to be taken into democratic public ownership to be run by workers for social good. We will need militant mass movements, strike actions at workplaces to begin to fight to win this, because it will be a political strike against billionaires. This is important to understand in the context of the opposition facing the federal as well as state and local governments. The Bolsheviks have pretty successfully co-opted the police brutality protests to accomplish their own socialist goals. I certainly oppose police brutality and the federal intrusion into my life. And I recognize that certain replacements would be worse, like replacing a czar with a genocidal dictator in Soviet Russia. It's important to pay attention, but the group that starts the revolution is rarely the same group that declares victory. Take a look at my video about who wins the game of Risk. It is the people like Joseph Fouché who work behind the scenes to hold power while others fight. Fouché participated in the French Revolution, beheaded some aristocrats, survived waves of beheadings himself, and emerged as Minister of Police in France. He stayed in power through the revolutionary government, Napoleon's rise, the restoration of the monarchy, Napoleon's 100-day return to power, and another restoration of the monarchy. French statesman Talleyrand had a similar story. His power survived the French Revolution before he helped Napoleon to take power, then helped overthrow Napoleon, and later helped Napoleon escape imprisonment and regain power for 100 days. Then Talleyrand also worked for the next government. What's happening now is the very beginning stages of serious economic catastrophe and widespread social unrest. Many different scenarios could play out, and some of those possibilities involve a revolution or civil war. But any revolution in the United States will be very fragmented. There will not be one organized force opposing the US government. Each little rebellion will be different. Some will take over police precincts and government buildings. Others will be entirely online, hacking, taking out cyber infrastructure, and intercepting information. Sure, at some point, larger cohesive movements will form. We might even see state governments take a stand against the feds. But this is a large country which was never really cohesive to begin with. In the event of revolution, a decentralized rebellion will spark in many places across the nation. City by city and state by state, the goals, demands, and ideologies of these movements will be unique. People who are out in the countryside will see a very different revolution than people see in the cities. It is possible that while the military focuses on urban opposition, the countryside simply fights a defensive war. Imagine a well-armed, tight-knit group of people in a relatively small proximity. They can grow and hunt their own food. They might even have stills making alcohol fuel for their tractors and trucks. These people exist all throughout America. When the time comes for them to protect themselves, their livelihoods, their land, their loved ones, and their way of life, it will be only in self-defense. These people are not insurgents, and they're not the type to allow insurgents into their communities. The US government has a big problem on its hands. The USA started with a guerrilla uprising, and the modern US military has never decisively won a war against guerrillas. Let's hope that enough people in power recognize their precarious positions and opt for a very simple approach, but one that does not come easy for tyrants. They can leave people alone and let them be free. To be honest, I don't really care if the Bolsheviks take over Seattle. I'm much more concerned with them taking over DC and being able to force their socialist agenda on the entire United States. Really, that's already happened to a large extent, and fragmentation of government would safeguard us. When there is no centralized power to control, it allows free people and all the economic and social benefits that they create to flourish. But individuals do need to prepare for that fragmentation. Under many scenarios, supply chains will suffer, and food and medicine will need to be sourced locally. Alternative currencies to the US dollar will be required in order to continue trade. Personally, I'd be more interested in fulfilling market demands at the local level than participating in any revolution. You gain more power by serving the demands of a local market. The more beneficial your contribution, the more you are needed and can set the tone for local governance. By producing certain tangible goods that work well as a medium of exchange, you essentially become a money printer. For more on that, check out my recent video on creating money in a worst case scenario. I'm Joe Jarvis, thanks for watching. Come back and see me again soon.